everyone, welcome back to Comic Book Issues. I'm your host, Brian Hines, the Last Angry Geek. And it's time for the July pull list. 4 weeks, 4 comics, quick reviews. We're going to start with the last week of June and Multiple Man #1, written by Matt Rosenberg and drawn by Andy McDonald. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a huge fan of Peter David's X Factor, specifically the second volume, the third one kind of sucked, where Multiple Man was running a detective agency with a bunch of his mutant friends, and there was a lot of weird, wacky adventures. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the plot threads left hanging when Peter David ended that volume have not been picked up and outright ignored. For instance, you've got Strong Guy and Wolfsbane on the New Mutants book, and Strong Guy killed Wolfsbane's son. I don't think they've even mentioned it. So, after X Factor ended, Multiple Man died in the Inhumans vs. X-Men miniseries. Don't ask. This issue picks up with the New Mutants finding a sealed vault with a single Madrox duplicate in it. Oh, his mutant power is that he can clone himself by hitting his body. It creates duplicates. Now, Prime Jamie is dead, but they find one last clone in a sealed vault. He was working on a serum to make the Madrox clones more independent of Jamie Prime, so when Jamie and all his dupes died, he survived. Unfortunately, he's still dying, so he borrows Bishop's time travel technology and goes into the future to find a cure for himself, but just ends up getting in a fight with his past self and attacked by a bunch of crazy future duplicates. Okay, visually this book isn't boring. The future Madrox designs are kind of crazy, but in a good way. Rosenberg is trying for that Peter David quirkiness, but he's veering more into that generic humor that goes for the big laugh. I'm still kind of confused by the time travel stuff, but it's issue 1, so I'll need to see if that becomes clear in later issues. I guess I'm just hoping this book will eventually address Layla Miller, who was pregnant with Jamie Prime's kid at the end of Peter David's second volume. I think Rosenberg has said they'll address the issue, but I'm not holding my breath. My recommendation? Skip it. Nothing here really wowed me, and this book just seems confusing and not worth the trouble. Maybe later issues will get better, and if so, I'll address that, but based on the strength of issue #1, no. Skip it. For week 2, it's Catwoman #1, written and drawn by Joelle Jones. Now, this is taking place right after the aborted wedding in Batman #50. Catwoman left Batman at the altar thinking she didn't want to make him happy because if he were happy, he might not be the best Batman he could be, and people would die and suffer for that. It didn't make sense to me either. Having left Gotham City, I'm not really sure what city she's in. Selina is now hiding from herself, drinking and gambling, not sleeping. She's living in a storage locker. A decrepit politician's wife, her body is falling apart. She's wearing a wig, her nose comes off. She's subsisting on fluids drained from young women. It's very Lucretia Borgia. She's setting up Selina with an army of Catwomen who are stealing for her. When one of these Catwomen kills a police officer, it turns the heat up on Selina so much that she has no choice but to put on the cat outfit again to clear her name. Okay, you do not need to know about the Bat Wedding to enjoy this book, although it does play into her state of mind. We briefly meet her supporting cast in this, but we don't get to know them. She just kind of walks by them on the way to the locker she's living out of. The art is gorgeous. Joelle Jones is a great artist, and she writes a very intriguing story. There's a real hook here. Who is this woman? Why is she setting up Catwoman? My recommendation? Buy it. Hey, I'm not a Catwoman fan, but I loved this first issue. I can't wait to see where this story goes. For week 3, it's Amazing Spider-Man #1, written by Nick Spencer and drawn by Ryan Ottley. Okay, so the plot for this was set up in Free Comic Book Day. Peter is now sharing his apartment with a supervillain, Boomerang. His degree that he got in Superior Spider-Man gets revoked when it's revealed that his thesis was based on Dr. Octopus's work, which isn't surprising because when Doc Ock was in Peter's body, he wrote the thesis to get Peter his degree. After he gets humiliated like this, he gets fired from the Daily Bugle, and he realizes things haven't been right for him since he broke up with MJ. And so, they decide to get back together and give their relationship another try. Also, he goes back to school to get his degree back, and his new teacher is the Lizard? One of the subplots in this book that I didn't realize going in is that the Kingpin is now the mayor of New York City. So Wilson Fisk is demonizing every superhero except for Spider-Man, who he's praising as a great man and giving the key to the city and all this wonderful stuff. So now all the other heroes are turning on him because they're getting demonized while he's getting praised. It's a good setup for a future conflict between him and the Kingpin. How do you take down the man who's constantly praising you? There's a backup tale in this where Mysterio, who got arrested by Spider-Man in the first few pages, is taken into court, and he has to explain how he was resurrected and introduces a demonic threat for Peter. Is hell coming to break up Peter and MJ again? This story was a lot better than the main story, which feels like it's covering too much ground to really get going. Ryan Ottley from Invincible on the art is okay. He's great on Invincible, but he's been drawing that universe so long, I think he needs a little time to get comfortable with the Marvel universe. It's also weird not to see a lot of blood and gore in one of his books. It's far past time Peter and MJ got back together, but before everyone gets excited, they are not undoing One More Day. That is never going to happen. I'm sorry. I hate it too. But that doesn't mean that Peter and MJ can't be a couple again, which is something I think they should have done a long time ago. Spencer is writing Peter is very earnest. He always owns up to a mistake when he makes it, but he's just not very good about lying, which is half the problem when he gets caught between his two lives. Like, Aunt May is so disappointed with him for plagiarizing Doc Ock's work, but he can't explain to her that Doc Ock took over his body for a while and that he's the one who wrote the thesis. So he's stuck kind of letting his aunt think he's a cheater, which he doesn't really want to do, but he can't explain to her that he's Spider-Man. That's a long-time character flaw in Peter, and one that I'm glad Nick Spencer picks up on. My recommendation, wait on this one. Wait for the trade paperback. That's how I did Slot's run. That way I just read the storylines I wanted to read. And I'm not sure Spencer's going to nail this one. Admittedly, he was good on Superior Foes and Ant-Man, but I'm not really feeling it in the first issue. This is one of those books where I think we need to give Nick and Ryan time to get up to speed. Finally, for week 4, it's Robotech number 11, written by Simon Furman and drawn by Marco Torrini. When this series started under Brian Wood, it was a straight-up retelling of the Robotech cartoon. I mean, what happened to Brian Wood? He was red hot coming off of Vertigo and Wildstorm, but then he goes over to Marvel and he bombs, and his career just hasn't been the same since. This is the part of the cartoon where Rick and Lisa are captured by the Zentradi and they're trying to work on their escape. But we're going to back up a bit. When Furman took over, he changed the story to add elements that were not in the cartoon. He created an alternate timeline of what we knew. Admiral Global is dead, seemingly killed in secret by Roy Fokker. So there's this whole subplot of the mystery of Global's death. Lisa is now running the SDF-1. It's a good way to do this book because a lot of people have been familiar with this cartoon for over 30 years. Now we can shake it up. Now we can do something different. Here's what should have happened, but now here's what's happening. Are we going to get back to that, or is this how it is going forward? Who knows? I should say that the alternate timeline is interesting enough, but only to those who are already familiar with the cartoon. So if you're jumping on to Robotech, the comic book, without having seen the cartoon, you might not even know that you're in an alternate universe. Torini's art is very, I want to say non-traditional. It's hard to explain. He draws well, but sometimes I see him repeating expressions on the same page in different panels, and sometimes I have trouble understanding what's happening. He's not a bad artist by any means, but it does seem like he's sketching things in rather than drawing in smooth, clean lines. You'll understand what I mean if you see the book. Oh. My recommendation, skip it. This is only for hardcore Robotech fans, and if you're one of those and you want to get into this comic, I think you need to go back and start at the beginning of this book, otherwise you're going to be a bit lost with all the new stuff they've been putting in. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining me for the July pull list. I'll see you back here in August. Until then, this is Comic Book Issues, and I'm your host, Brian Hines, the Last Angry Geek.